Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
He ended up losing all of his skills. He ended up having just an onset of GI issues to where he couldn't digest food. For like 4 months, we were just having diarrhea, undigested food. He wasn't sleeping. He lost literally all of his skills. He couldn't hold a spoon anymore. And at that point, we were just demanding answers. And every time I would talk to somebody and tell them what happened, and it just so happened to be that the timeline of when things took a turn south was his 12-month checkup. My husband and I weren't thinking that that was the culprit, but that was just our story because we're like, this is when it started. And we always got like a weird vibe from the doctors and from people. And I didn't realize it at the time. It was like nobody was helping us search for the answers of like what went wrong with him, because I think they probably had a good idea and they maybe were afraid to acknowledge that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just assuming here, but we kind of had that in our gut, but we didn't know for sure, right? It was just us and then the whole world against us, because everything we read and everyone we talked to told us that nope, that just happens.
Hey there, it's Brooke, and welcome to Finding Hope on the Spectrum, where I have heart-to-heart conversations with parents, professionals, and autistic individuals sharing personal insight and life experiences. Together, we dive deep into supports, programs, and stories that offer inspiration, insight, and most importantly, hope for the neurodiverse community. Before we begin with today's topic, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you know someone who this would be helpful for, please pass it along. Remember to always stay curious, be kind, and have an open heart. Okay, we're going to get started. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. I've been looking forward to it. Found Amanda, our guest today, on Instagram and just loved what she was sharing and thought she had so much knowledge and firsthand experience. And so it's going to be a real treat to have her on today. And before we get started in our conversation, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Amanda and share a little bit more about her. So Amanda Crowell, RN and BSN, is a former neurotrauma ICU nurse and now a full-time special needs mom. While she built her foundation in nursing, most of her true training has come from being in the trenches as a mom, researching, advocating, and pursuing integrative and biomedical approaches that changed her family's health. Now she shares her journey and ongoing training to give other parents hope, encouragement, and practical steps towards healing. So welcome, Amanda.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I just love that you have firsthand experience and really enjoyed our initial conversation, just getting to know you better and hearing your story. And I just think it's so important to get this information out there and you have so much knowledge. And I'm just excited to share more about everything you're going to share today. So as I mentioned, in your bio, you were an RN with a BSN and are working towards your MAPS certification. So I'd love to have you share what inspired you to blend conventional nursing with MAPS style approaches. And we'll get into what MAPS is. I have another episode on MAPS as well. So we'll make sure to touch on that. But let's get started with kind of your inspiration.
Yeah. So my inspiration to blend the two was really just seeking answers for my own health and for my children's. I was sick for decades and was just always told everything was normal. And I didn't really go deep looking for answers until I had children. And I watched them go from healthy kids to very sick kids. And that led me to search for answers. Like I wasn't willing to accept eczema was normal or this was normal. The things that we were witnessing, it didn't set right with me. And so we went searching for answers. And when I started to find it, and we found that there's so much healing going on outside of traditional medicine. And so when we started to witness that and experience ourselves, I just knew there was never any going back. So for me, really, it was just our own personal journey.
Yeah. And that'll motivate you to find answers.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that when we talked initially, you kind of shared your story and your kind of some of the challenges. What kinds of health issues were you experiencing that kind of led you on this path?
Yeah, for me personally or for my kids?
For both, actually. It'd be great if you wanted to
Okay.
share whatever you feel
Yeah.
comfortable
Oh,
sharing.
yeah. Goodness. Going back from a young kid, I had sleep issues. Like I would have issues sleeping. I would have brain fog, like really severe brain fog. I remember like in high school, like thinking, like, what's wrong with me? Do I have to tell my mom like to take me to the doctor? Because like I was afraid I had like cancer or something because I really couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I went from being like a straight A student to like struggling academically. I was also very athletic. And so I was like at the top of, I was a competitive swimmer. So I was like one of the best. And then I got to the point where it was like I couldn't get better and I couldn't train and I developed asthma and I wasn't sleeping and I just had so many health issues, gut issues. And it felt like my brain stopped working. It was like I didn't have any energy. I literally just felt like, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't my brain work anymore? And I just never got any answers. I had all of these health issues that would pop up. It'd be like, I'd develop acne. I would have all these random GI issues. I would get food poisoning all the time. I just had the worst insomnia, no matter what I did. And I was always just told, like, here's a sleeping pill or here's this. There was never anybody that was like trying to figure out why I struggled with all of these things my whole life. And so I ended up getting my appendix removed. I just had so many horrible GI issues. And it wasn't until I had kids that when they were babies, they appeared healthy and they were developing typically. And then we just started to see these health issues pile on. So initially, I think it was like with my son, it was the eczema was the first thing that we saw. We just saw terrible eczema come out on his skin. And then it was like the sleeplessness. And then it was the GI issues. And the same thing happened with my daughter. And we were just told like eczema is normal. Like, here, put this cream on it. And, people tell me all the time, like, oh, eczema is genetic. It's because, so-and-so in the family has eczema. But eczema, and so we all think that these things are just genetic and we don't actually search for what's causing the dysfunction in the body. Because that's a symptom of the body. If the body's speaking to us, there's something wrong. Something is not right. And so instead of getting to the root of why, we're ignoring that and we're being conditioned to think it's normal. So ultimately, witnessing that with my children, it just never sat right with me for some reason. Like I accepted it for myself for decades. But when it came to my kids, I was like, this just doesn't seem right. Like also my younger brothers are quite a bit younger than me. So I was like a little mom. I was like 8 years old. I would wake up, I would like want to change them and feed them at bedtime or, in the middle of the night. I always wanted to be like little mom and I helped take care of everybody's kids. And I just always thought when I become a mom, it's just going to be like so natural and so easy. Cause like I've been doing this my whole life. I was taking care of babies when I was like a little girl. And then in my 30s, I had kids. And was that like a big surprise because it was the most difficult thing I had ever experienced. It was like, why won't they sleep? I can't sleep. They're having, all they do is throw up their food and they have these gut issues and their skin is like their rashes, their skin's a mess. And like, they're just miserable. And like, people are just telling me this is normal. And it's like, this isn't normal. And so in my gut, I think I knew like something was wrong, but I didn't have the information. Like I didn't know. You would go on Google and Google is, I know now, Google is pretty biased. It's censored. There's certain information that you'll find when you search Google and you don't find all the answers, unfortunately. And so it really took us witnessing really a devastating illness. Like my son at his 12-month checkup, he went in there, he had speech, he was developing typically, he was meeting all of his milestones, and he ended up getting extremely ill following that visit. And at the time, we never put two and two together. And as a nurse, I would have never thought it had anything to do with what happened that day or what he received that day. But he ended up losing all of his skills. He ended up having just an onset of GI issues to where he couldn't digest food. For like 4 months, we were just having diarrhea, undigested food. He wasn't sleeping. He lost literally all of his skills. He couldn't hold a spoon anymore. And at that point, we were just demanding answers. And every time I would talk to somebody and tell them what happened, and it just so happened to be that the timeline of when things took a turn south was his 12-month checkup. My husband and I weren't thinking that that was the culprit, but that was just our story because we're like, this is when it started. And we always got like a weird vibe from the doctors and from people. And I didn't realize it at the time. It was like nobody was helping us search for the answers of like what went wrong with him, because I think they probably had a good idea and they maybe were afraid to acknowledge that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just assuming here, but we kind of had that in our gut, but we didn't know for ssure, right? It was just us and then the whole world against us, because everything we read and everyone we talked to told us that nope, that just happens. But he got an autism diagnosis right around the time my daughter was due for her 12-month checkup and all of the vaccines that she gets that day, or that they get at 12 months. And in my heart and in my gut, I was like, I don't feel right about this. And she developmentally, she was completely on point, had nothing, she wasn't behind at all. Great speech. And so we went into the doctor's office that day. I didn't want to proceed with any immunizations because I was trying to do my own research. I was trying to find information because I just didn't feel right especially after my son just kept getting worse from that day on. He never got better. We just saw him continue to get worse up until 2.5 years old. And so went in there and had a serious conversation with our pediatrician. And he reassured me that my daughter was fine and that autism is something different. What my son had was different. He's looking at my daughter, her eye contact, her speech, like he's not worried about her. Literally, he said, I'm not worried about her. And so I was like, okay, well, I think that's a lot to give at once. So we'll give the ones that are important, kind of like everyone thinks, like, these are the things that are important. Like, I know people are always like, well, I'll give the vaccines that are important. And so I didn't do the flu and I didn't do the varicella because I was like, well, when I was younger, we had chickenpox parties. So I'm not worried about the chickenpox. So I didn't give those, but we gave everything else. And she had an onset of PANDAS. And looking back, that's when that was triggered, and she lost her speech, and she soon after got diagnosed with apraxia. And so when we went home that day, like we just knew we made the worst decision of our lives. We were like, what did we just do? And so for me, that was the moment that changed everything, because it was like my suspicions and my intuition as a mom, but like that day just confirmed. I didn't need a study. I didn't need someone to tell me. I knew what I witnessed. And I think once or God helped us, we started to find resources of like the root cause, kind of like integrative, holistic healing. I started to find that kind of information, and I started implementing simple things on my own, like Epsom salt baths and getting all the toxins out of our home and gluten, dairy-free diet. And we just started seeing positive changes in our son, like some subtle shifts in him. Like the eye contact started to come back, and he started to like enjoy the toys he used to play with and be more social again. And then luckily I found a MAPS doctor who kind of changed everything for us. So we found a MAPS doctor and we started working with him. And we just experienced rapid healing in our son. I mean, it was like the skills that he lost. We were identifying things that went wrong inside, like a root cause level. So it's like, yes, kids with autism, they have issues with eye contact and speech and these gut issues, but why? What's actually going on below the surface? So he helped us look and test and figure out what was going on with our son. And when we started to address these things, he just started to rapidly heal.
I mean, what a journey you've been on. I just commend you for not giving up and
Yes.
fighting and, searching, even though it's not easy to find the information. You're a warrior. And,
Thank you.
that is an incredible story of resilience. And
Yes. And what you said there just made me think, like, not giving up. And I think if we would have went the traditional route, so initially when my son received his autism diagnosis, I didn't know all of this information yet, but we were recommended to do genetic testing. And that's pretty standard. And I think it's great. Everyone should do genetic testing if they're able to. But at the time, our insurance didn't cover it. And so we were like, oh, it's going to be thousands of dollars. And, we're just going to have to hold off right now. And instead, we ended up finding, this information in the MAPS doctor. And we went another route and we experienced this just rapid healing in our son. But had we have gone that route of doing the genetics first, I don't know if I would be sitting here talking to you today, because we ended up later doing genetics on our son. And we found that he has a rare genetic disorder that does have an association with autism. And so if, you know what I mean, if we would have just found that rare genetic disorder diagnosis early on, would we have just said, like, this is our son, this is our life, like, this is just like the cards we were dealt, and we wouldn't have looked deeper to try to help him and support his body where it was struggling. So I just am so grateful that things played out the way that they did.
yeah, absolutely. And that's so significant. I'd love for you to share what MAPS stands for. You've mentioned that, and I know you're getting certified in that, which is so exciting.
Yeah. Yes.
So yes, if you could, for those that don't know about it, be good just to kind of give a quick overview.
MAPS is the Medical Academy of Pediatric and Special Needs. And so what they have is it's training. You can become a member, you can get training, and it accounts for your continuing credits as a professional. So whether you're a nurse or a doctor. And really what it's doing is it's taking an integrative approach at healthcare. So it's really bridging the gaps in mainstream medicine. A lot of these physicians, they're traditionally trained, but there's so many gaps in the care model where people aren't getting looked at as an individual. We're treating everyone the same, regardless of their genetics, regardless of their history or, their exposures. And we're just saying, oh, you have these symptoms. Well, we'll give you this drug. And it's a very profitable model, but it's not doing that person, any good. And so the MAPS training, what it is it's really getting to the root cause. It's looking at that person. It's looking at their genetic vulnerabilities. It's looking at their exposures. It's looking at the biochemical pathways in the body, like the chemistry. It's, all the things like the methylation cycles. And you're looking at everything in the body to see, where is it not working right? How can we support this person? Where is this person's genetic vulnerabilities where we can provide some more support? There's a lot of emphasis on the gut microbiome and things like that. And so I strongly advocate for MAPS providers because they do have this extensive training and knowledge pertaining to autism. I'll share a quick little experience. So before we found our MAPS doctor, I was so eager to get my son into a functional integrative doctor. So the doctor we work with now, I called his office. This was at the beginning of our journey, and he had a really long wait list. And I was like, well, I can't wait that long. I'm getting my son help now. I know this is available. I can't wait that many months. So I found another MD who was doing integrative medicine, functional medicine. And we started my son with him. And I quickly found out that not all integrative functional doctors are the same. They're not created equal. And he did not have the most up-to-date information or training on autism. Not to say he wasn't a good doctor, but I highly suspected cerebral folate deficiency in my son just from all of the information I was reading and everything, I was researching. And I brought forth the studies, I brought forth the information, I printed out so much stuff. And I said, I think that my son has this. Can we test him? Can we, if he's positive, this is what he needs for treatment, just kind of just giving some basic information that was out there that the MAPS doctors were using. And he literally scolded me. And he was like, are you going to tell me what to do? Or do you want me to help your son? And he said he didn't believe in that. He actually had my son taking folic acid and a multivitamin, which is like a big no-no for cerebral folate deficiency. And for a lot of these kids, he's like, it doesn't matter if he's taking folic acid and his vitamin, because we're giving him this vitamin, which has the proper form of folate, so it'll be fine. He had so many red flags. We immediately backed out. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to go get on that really long wait list for this other doctor. Because I talked to one of his nurses and she was like, yes, we know what that is. And like, I'll get you, they were advocating for my son before we even saw them. Like, we can get this test set up for you. And we can have everything ready. So when you do meet with the doctor, you know what I mean? We're not delaying treatment. And long story short, he ended up having cerebral folate deficiency. And it was like a life-changing intervention treatment for him. And so I'm just so glad that, I guess just advocating for your kids and just knowing that, like, if I wasn't doing my own due diligence and looking into all of these things, we could have not experienced like the healing we saw in our son because we were missing a major piece. So I just always want to encourage parents to always be your kid's biggest advocate.
Absolutely. That's huge. It's huge. And I think it's also trusting your gut as a parent, like these professionals with these letters after their name are coming in and making recommendations. You still have to listen to your gut. And
you do. You really do. It's there. Yes. We're giving those God-given instincts for a reason.
100%. This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com. Yeah, I love that story. I love that you shared that journey because I think it's so empowering and important. And it's an approach that you have to team up with professionals that are trained in the areas that need to be trained in, but you also need to listen and not give up. And, I think listen to that gut and keep moving forward. And you got to the place where you were at. And I've not heard of that term, cerebral folate. What was the last part? Deficiency.
Cerebral folate deficiency. We can chat about it really quick if you want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you want to share just what that is.
Yeah. So cerebral folate deficiency, it's when there is not enough folate in the brain. And there can be several reasons why there's not enough folate in the brain. Some of them are somebody's genetics. They could have, whether it's MTHFR polymorphisms or folate receptor genes, to where their body just doesn't process folate right. And especially if you're consuming the standard American diet where everyone's just getting bombarded with folic acid and your body can't convert that. So that can contribute like a little bit, but most significantly are folate receptor autoantibodies. So if you've ever heard of the FRAT test, so what that is it's your body is producing antibodies to the folate receptor in your brain. And so it's not allowing folate to get into the brain. And so also mitochondrial dysfunction, which is really prevalent in autism also, can further contribute to cerebral folate deficiency because it's just such an energy dependent thing to have to get the folate up into the brain across the blood-brain barrier. And so there's a lot of reasons that these kids ultimately end up with not enough folate in their brain. And if you look up the symptoms of cerebral folate deficiency, many of them are symptoms of autism. And so when we ended up starting our son on, after he had a positive FRAT test, we were already doing a ton of amazing things for him, but we started him on 15 milligrams of high dose methylpro. And literally that by day 2, he had rapidly gained back so many of the skills that he lost. Like he was slowly getting better with the tweaks that we were doing and, with when we started working with our doctor. But when we put that folate in, it was literally like his brain turned on again. He walked up the stairs for the first time in his life because he regressed before he was able to walk upstairs. So we would have to hold his hands, and the coordination, kids with cerebral folate deficiency really have an issue with like the motor and coordination. He couldn't do it. But by day 2 of this folate, he was walking up the stairs by himself.
Wow.
He went and completed all of his puzzles, everything that we were working hand over hand. The skills that he lost. It's like, okay, this is how you put these pieces on this pegboard or this puzzle. And it was like, he just didn't get it. And he was so slow to do it. He sat down at his little picnic table and he did all his puzzles and his pegboards like in a split second. And he stood up and he clapped for himself. And my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, what did we just witness? Like, honestly, his brain was so deprived of folate, and it was amazing to see when he started getting it again.
That's incredible. That is an incredible story. And also a testament to what you were able to accomplish in getting that test done and not giving up, and understanding the importance of that. Now, I want to make sure we talk a little bit about kind of how you would define biomedical treatments. You've touched on some examples, which I love, and kind of brought them to life. But, it's a term that not everybody knows. And I think it's important just to kind of do an overview of how you would define biomedical treatments as it relates to autism.
Yeah, I think defining it pertaining to autism, honestly, it's really any chronic illness. It's going to be looked at the same way. So what you're doing is you're looking at nutrition, huge impact on nutrition, immune function. Immune is so big in autism. Most of these kids have, immune dysfunction. So you're looking at methylation, you're looking at the metabolic status, and you are looking at environmental influences, which are huge. You're looking at that person's genetics specifically, because we know not everybody tolerates the same medications or the same procedures or exposures the same. So we know we're all unique. And so there's a big impact on the gut health. So ultimately what it's doing is it's looking to support and address these deficiencies or weaknesses and create homeostasis and balance in the body. And so, really, it's just, I feel like it's honestly just bridging the gap in our current care model. It's really just like that holistic approach to care that I think that everybody should take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's so important to share because there's still many people out there that have not heard of this type of approach or heard of MAPS that have children with autism. Yeah. And I think it's so important for them to know about it. And so I'm grateful that you're here today to share this information and your story, because you had, some amazing changes and an amazing experience of healing as well, as much as it was hard. You have such an incredible healing journey. So I'd like to talk about the kind of how you integrate holistic or biomedical approaches with your nursing background as you're, navigating this process with your own kids and going to be helping others too.
Yeah, so I'm not working myself as a nurse anymore. I haven't for a while, but having that nursing background is so valuable. It's really such a solid foundation, and integrating it with what I know now. My first route isn't always going to a medication, whereas before that tends to be for a nurse. It's like you have a drug for everything, typically, right? And it's funny how looking back, previously as a nurse, before I knew what I knew today, I was so skeptical of anything natural, like any natural remedy. It's like my intuition told me, like, I always wanted to be healthy, but it's like we're conditioned to think like if you use an herb or a vitamin, like it can be dangerous. Everyone's like, oh, well, I was told that taking that vitamin can be dangerous, or I was told that they find 1,000 reasons why an herb is like the worst thing you should use. And then, but none of us look at the labels of the drugs that we're giving our kids, or the vaccine inserts that have literally death listed as a potential side effect. Nobody's afraid of that. Nobody takes a second to reflect on that. So it's just, I use medications. We still do use medications, but do I use them without considering other things? No. Do I use them without asking, why is this dysfunction? Why is this symptom happening in the first place, and working on addressing that? I'm always, like with our son, he has major histamine mast cell issues and allergy issues. And so we do end up using medications when we need to, especially during like allergy season. But I'm always working on trying to, not need to just solely rely on those. And a lot of times the natural supports are enough for most of the time during the year, and being mindful of the diet and, addressing his gut and any potential mold exposures and things like that. So it's really, it's just having to be mindful of everything, right? We can't just be so narrow focused that like one way is the only way. And there's so many tools out there available in the world of healing. And as sick as people are today, we really need to use them all. I think wherever they fit. And that might be a medication to get a symptom, managed while you work on the root cause of why it's occurring. So
absolutely. No, I think that's so important. And I know you mentioned earlier some of the recommendations that you share, and I've seen this on your Instagram page, and you talk about foundational steps, and you talk about diet and eliminating folic acid, reducing toxins, sleep, the importance of sleep. So just to name a few, but if you could walk us through some of these areas and why you see them as so important and first steps for families out there that are listening, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So really the number one is diet. And that's the one everyone hates because it's so hard for people initially to get on board with the diet. And I talk to so many families who reach out and they've done so many things and they're doing so many great things, but they haven't fully committed to the diet. And they're like, my kid still gets dairy or gluten. It's just a little bit. And I'm like, well, that little bit is holding them back, because that one exposure can last weeks in the body in terms of inflammation and the, antibodies, if they have autoimmune stuff going on. There's so many reasons why we need to be gluten-free, dairy-free, just as a baseline. And I understand some people do have children with these severe eating restrictions and things like that. And so I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but there are professionals out there that can help you. There are also reasons driving that eating disorder that may be, identifying whether it's mineral deficiencies like zinc or PANDAS, what the case may be, that you can start to work towards getting those, or even just cleaning up the diet initially for those kids. So it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it is worth it. It is so worth it. So diet first and foremost. And then as far as toxins, unfortunately today, regardless of how diligent you are about monitoring what comes into your home, we are all being bombarded with so many toxins, many that have never even been tested for safety. We don't even know the effects of them. So we really need to be diligent about what comes in our homes and not adding to that. So anything you put on your skin, anything you put in your body, we're just really aware of that in our house. We don't use any fragrance anymore. All of our cleaning supplies are completely non-toxic. Even our disinfectant, there's non-toxic disinfectant like hypochlorous acid. So really just if you're continuing to take in new toxins, how is your body going to deal with the toxic burden that it already has? Right. And so the gut also has to be addressed, and diet's the first way to do that. So if the gut is leaky, that's the body's way of dealing with toxins, because they need to be eliminated through the gut. That's mainly how they're eliminated. So we have these kids where their guts are a mess and they have a high toxic burden and they're being exposed to new toxins. Like, your body's never going to heal. It's this vicious cycle of inflammation. And so really addressing the diet, addressing the gut, reducing the exposure so that the body can work on getting rid of those exposures that, the toxins that are built up. And sleep is huge. And a lot of times sleep will improve once the gut starts to improve. Some simple things that can help with sleep would be like magnesium deficiency. Many of these kids are very deficient in magnesium. That was one thing that I was so deficient in for decades, that I think I wasn't able to sleep. And then when I found magnesium, it was literally like a Xanax to me. It was like,
Wow.
oh my goodness, I can sleep, I can rest. It's like my body was just so deficient in magnesium. So a lot of these kids, that's the case. And also for sleep, if their guts, they have gut pain and their guts are inflamed and their brains are inflamed, it's going to be difficult. And a lot of these kids have very high glutamate and they have high histamine, which are both very stimulating to the brain. And so one way that we can work on those is through the gut, just through the diet. You automatically are addressing so many different things just by addressing the diet. But like I've helped so many parents troubleshoot things. They're doing so many things right. But then they'll say, like, out of nowhere, my kid just started to go backwards and started to have these behaviors and aggression, and like they can't piece together what happened. And like we're talking, and then next thing we figure out is like it's springtime and histamine is high, and their kids are just experiencing, high histamine and the effects of that on the brain. It's very agitating. And so they're like, oh my gosh, day 2 of giving antihistamines, like my kid's back to baseline. It's like, it's just, we need to be aware of all of these things so that we can help our kids. Because when our kids are not able to talk to us and they start having behaviors and they're being aggressive or they're being violent and they're head banging, they're not doing that just because they have a behavioral problem. They're doing that because they're trying to communicate something's wrong.
Yeah.
So, and the sleep, I didn't really talk much about sleep as far as I said magnesium helps, but in general, sleep is when the brain detoxes. So the brain has a detox system. It's the glymphatic system. And it's typically between like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. that the brain is detoxing. And so if you have a kid that's like up multiple times at night, or they're up half the night, when's their brain going to detox? So we really need to work on why is that kid not sleeping and get them sleeping. And a doctor or professional that's trained in identifying all of these potential root causes can help get your kid in a better place. So.
No, fantastic. I mean, I think what you mentioned, that root cause is what's so important, getting to the root cause as opposed to dealing with the symptoms.
Absolutely.
And, incredible. And I love that these are things that, you mentioned they're not always easy, but things that families can start to implement and just start, one step at a time and slowly get to that goal. So important. So I want to make sure you've mentioned PANS and PANDAS a couple times, and I've seen it on your Instagram account as well. Can you share, a little bit more about what PANS and PANDAS is? And I think it's just important for us to understand it better.
Yep. So what it is it's an autoimmune process. There's antibodies being produced to the brain. It's often the dopamine receptors or the basal ganglion. And PANS is when it could be an umbrella of any infection. And PANDAS is when it's specifically tied to strep. And so both of my kids deal with that. And I honestly think there was a point when I was living in mold and my health was really bad that I had it as well. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I had just like OCD and I had eating disorders and I had so many things that just came out of the blue that went away after I got out of mold. So and it's often present in siblings. So a lot of times when it affects one kid, it affects more than one kid in the family, but there's often like a kid that will be impacted more significantly than the others. And we do see that with our family, with our kids. But yeah, so, and with autism in general, autism is very much immune. And so a lot of these kids, we mentioned the folate receptor autoantibodies. That's another type of autoimmunity to a different type of brain tissue. And so I just wonder, and I know my son has other central nervous system tissues that he has antibodies to. And we know he has antibodies to his thyroid, Hashimoto's. So it's like, if we were to actually check in these children with autoimmunity, I wonder, or with autism, how many of them we would find autoimmunity. I think a lot of them, and it's stemming from that leaky gut. And so it's just, there's no way around, like we really have to address the gut in autism. It is so huge.
The leaky gut, let's talk about what exactly is a leaky gut? Yeah,
so leaky gut, so the tight junctions in the gut are supposed to be there to protect the gut essentially is like considered the outside of the body, right? It's not like it's not a part of like the blood and everything else. It's supposed to be separated. And so when you have a leaky gut, those tight junctions will open up and it allows food proteins and toxins and things to get directly into the bloodstream. And when that happens, this cascade of inflammation and downstream effects will happen. And it also makes the blood-brain barrier more leaky as well. And so really just eating gluten alone does make the gut a little bit leaky, even in a healthy person. It contains zonulin, so it will cause some degree of leaky gut, which is why if you're trying to work on healing the gut or if you have autoimmunity, it's just so important to be gluten-free.
Yeah.
But yeah, so...
That makes a lot of sense. I hear that term all the time and never really stopped to pause and think about what does that actually mean and what are the implications of it. And that is a great description. That makes a lot of sense.
Inflammation and autoimmunity usually, if it's persisting.
Yes. And is that, now I know you talk a lot about Leucovorin, and I have clients that are on Leucovorin.
Yeah.
And have seen some really nice positive changes, working with MAPS doctors, of course. But if you could share just a little bit about Leucovorin and how it's impacted your own kids, that would be great.
Yeah. So when we're talking about Leucovorin, it's usually because a child has cerebral folate deficiency, and that's why they're benefiting. And Leucovorin is the prescription form of folinic acid. So you can get folinic acid over the counter. Typically, it's in low doses. And there are some companies coming out now that have higher doses. But it's just another form of folate. So we all need folate. We all know how essential folate is from, growing a baby to just a child. And even our brains today, like people who are deficient in folate tend to have depression and all of these other issues. So people who have MTHFR, which is I think people are starting to get aware with MTHFR. It's very common now to hear that term. Yeah. Your body has a hard time taking folate, even from vegetables or folic acid, and metabolizing it to a form of folate that the body can use. So specifically folic acid, the body's not able to convert that efficiently. And so that's why folinic acid or Leucovorin is recommended, because it's further converted so that the body, it bypasses a lot of those steps. If you have an MTHFR SNP, it bypasses a lot of those steps so that the body can utilize it. I recently learned that there are some people who cannot utilize folinic acid either. It's a small percentage, and it's associated with MTHFS variant. And that's a newer concept to me, but makes sense because there are some children that have cerebral folate deficiency that have folate receptor autoantibodies that don't respond positively to Leucovorin, that don't tolerate it, that could actually get worse. But that's not the majority at all. The majority of people are getting better. They are seeing positive results. We were actually started on, like I mentioned earlier, high dose methylfolate instead of folinic acid. So it's just another form of folate, and it's actually the most bioavailable form. So methylfolate doesn't have to be converted in the body at all. And so there's literally so many different ways that doctors go about this. Even at the MAPS training, like the doses and the recommendations of what forms of folate to use. And there's a little bit of variation. I don't think anyone has treat every kid this way, but also that's because we know not every kid has the same genetics or has the same health history, or everything's going to be a little bit different. So honestly, these treatments need to be tailored to the patient. And that's why a doctor who has this training is going to know that if a child's not tolerating Leucovorin, like there's going to be some areas where you might need to troubleshoot what's best for that kid. But for the most part, I get so many messages in my inbox of people who are just sharing their stories about Leucovorin and how like their kid went from, not talking their skills to like just seeing the skills come back using Leucovorin. And a lot of these people aren't even addressing the diet fully, or they aren't even doing all of the other pieces. And I'm like, wow, like, so, there's a significant folate deficiency in the brain, but I do think that everybody, if they are going to move forward with leucovorin, like you need to have all the steps in place. Like you need to be doing the diet, because most of the reasons kids are benefiting is because they have these folate receptor autoantibodies and they can't convert folic acid. So if they're not avoiding the fortified foods, you know what I mean? They're not getting the full benefit. So, and dairy itself they found in studies that dairy itself cross-reacts with the folate receptors in the brain. So it's actually triggering these folate receptor autoantibodies further. And so the goal with leucovorin isn't for someone to be on leucovorin forever. We don't want to fall back into that model of like a pill to fix everything, right? So the reason kids need leucovorin in the first place is because most of them have an autoimmune process going on, not getting folate into the brain. And so how do we address that autoimmune process? Well, we have to address the gut and the diet and the immune dysfunction and figure out what things are interfering with the body and the immune system and restore those. So in the MAPS training, I heard this case study of this child who had like just rapid recovery with leucovorin, but they were also addressing the gut. They looked at her genetics. They looked at everything they needed to look at. And she was off of leucovorin, I think, before 2 years, and was just on like recovered, never had to look back at biomedical treatments. Wow. Because you know what I mean? It wasn't just giving a kid leucovorin and saying, okay, here's leucovorin for the rest of your life. You're going to be on this. That's not the goal. And that's not, you know what I mean? So I just think, unfortunately, so many people out there don't know that there's all these other steps you need to address to just get that child back to functioning properly, their immune system working properly, because they shouldn't need to be on leucovorin for forever.
Right.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Well, and it's all about, full body healing, right? Just really getting to the root of healing versus, just providing, this supplement or medication. Yeah. So the body can start to operate the way it should, in a healed state.
Exactly. And I think that's maybe one thing that gives the integrative, holistic, functional space a bad rep, is because people are so used to this, like they want a pill to fix whatever is going on. So they might themselves dabble and be like, oh, I heard this supplement's really good for speech, with like sulforaphane, for example. And so they're like, I'm going to give it a try. And so they don't do anything different. And they give their child sulforaphane and they don't see any benefit, or they see they see worsening or something. And they're automatically saying like, these alternative approaches are bad and they made their kid worse, or they don't work. And it's like, well, you just willy-nilly tried something. You know what I mean? You just like basically took a dart and threw it and hoped you would hit a target. Whereas like, that's not what this approach is about. It's really taking that person as an individual and saying, well, what makes you you? What makes you unique? Where are your vulnerabilities? What exposures have you had? And where is your body deficient? And like, that's when everything starts to come together. So I wish all the parents could afford to work with a doctor who did this. And unfortunately, when you do root cause work, insurance does not participate with that. So a lot of these doctors, they aren't able to use insurance or take insurance. And so that can be a barrier for some families. And so, you have to prioritize your finances. But in the meantime, there's some amazing resources. There were so many things we were able to do that we saw benefit from before we even saw a MAPS doctor. And I recommend that to families, because you don't want to wait around to get into one of these doctors and then have them tell you, like, start this diet that you could have started 4 months ago. You know what I mean? Like, you want them to like tell you like the really nitty gritty stuff, like that you can't find on the internet yourself. So
yes, it's such a good point. Yes, I know. And, I think your Instagram page has really great resources, and I know you'll continue to share as well. So, and we'll make sure to share with our listeners where they can find you too. So, and if a family wants to find a MAPS doctor, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yep. You can go to medmaps.org. So medmaps.org is their website. And from there, you can click on directory and you can put in your zip code and it will bring up, or I think it's state. It might be by state. And it will bring up a list of people who, typically how it works is you are a MAPS member. You can be a MAPS member, MAPS training, like you've went to their conferences or attended a conference, or a MAPS fellow. So MAPS fellow is like the furthest training in MAPS. So that means that you've gone through their fellowship program, which I have not done yet. But you can see on there, like if someone's a MAPS fellow or if they have attended a conference. But the great thing about MAPS too is these healthcare professionals that are in this network, they're all like a family. So if you go to one of them, it's nice to know that they're aware of all of this information, even if they don't have all of the answers, which not everybody has all of the answers. They can network with their colleagues. They can, reach out to someone and say, hey, I have this patient. Like, what do you think with this? So honestly, I think it's a good start just to get there and find someone who has this knowledge base.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we had talked about research as well and some of the, kind of findings that are coming out around vaccines and autism. And I'd love to have you share just a little bit more about what's going on in the field.
Yeah, because I know on the internet right now, there is a lot of information about the recent internal study at Henry Ford. So what that was, it was a birth cohort study that looked at vaccinated versus unvaccinated individuals. And so what this study found is that there was 4.5 times increased risk of neurodevelopmental disorders in children that were vaccinated, 5 times the risk of asthma, and double increased risk of autoimmunity if you were vaccinated. And so the issue is that I don't think it was even put out when this study was actually done or finished, because the authors were sitting on it. They were hiding. They did not want to publish this information. And so when this was found out and they were confronted, they actually said, this is what I read, that they feared professional backlash of what would happen to them professionally if they were to release something that went against the mainstream vaccine narrative. And so what's significant about this is that this went basically to the Senate record. So now that it's been brought to this level, it can't just get quietly dismissed or like hidden like all of the other vaccine studies that just had inconvenient findings, which we know for decades this has been happening. There's a study that proves or that shows that there is harm being done with vaccination. And so those studies are buried or they're manipulated. And so now this being brought to this level is, and I think we all deserve to know that. And it just goes to show you like where the science is with vaccines, right? It's instead of it being an open discussion, it's like, if it doesn't fit the narrative, it doesn't make it to there. And for me, I'll share my personal experience because I have 2 children that were fully vaccinated. Well, my daughter almost fully vaccinated through 12 months and my son until about 2 years. And they both have autoimmune stuff. They both had horrible eczema. They both had developmental, neurodevelopmental issues, regression, pretty much all of the things that kids are dealing with today. And then we ended up having a 3rd child, and we didn't plan on having him because we just had our hands full. And we were like, we couldn't imagine having another kid with special needs. But we were gifted this. Luckily, we had an oops baby. And so we have this 3rd child. And we did a lot of things differently. And one of the main things that we did differently was he's never received any vaccines. And he is our only child who has never regressed. He has no neurodevelopmental disorders. He has no autoimmune stuff. He never had eczema. He never had GI issues. He never had the, sleep issues and all the issues that my babies had. he never had any of it. And so it's just like, I don't need a study to tell me what I already know. And I know so many other parents have the same stories, but it just hurts. It hurts that these professionals are so fearful of what's going to happen to them that they're withholding this kind of information that is harming children potentially.
Absolutely.
And I don't know where we go from here, because I think, everyone goes into healthcare, into being a doctor or, healthcare professional because they want to help people. But then they get put into this system where they're only allowed to treat people a certain way, and they're only allowed to acknowledge certain things. And more importantly, they're only given certain information. Like these doctors said, like they knew if they posted this, it wouldn't be good. And so I have this book here, this Vax Facts from Paul Thomas. He posted a study that he did in he's a pediatrician, so his own office, with children, the families that didn't want to vaccinate and the families that did vaccinate. And he said that even the people that vaccinated, it was usually a less aggressive schedule. But when he posted the findings of his study, he lost his license the next day.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, I don't know if people know that this is going on. And most of the doctors, I don't think the doctors even know, because they're only given the studies that show that it's safe. And I don't think many of them have read the vaccine inserts. And someone brought it to my attention that they might have removed it now, but on the physician's insert for the MMR, it used to list type 1 diabetes as a side effect. And I've actually met a few people now who have had their child develop type 1 diabetes following that immunization. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, it is a huge problem and needs to be addressed, and important to get this message out there. And, I've had my own experience. I've shared, in some of my episodes with my own daughter who has the MTHFR mutation and had when she was 2.
Yes.
And, had a doctor feel like I shouldn't have any more vaccines. And then, of course, in California, they changed the law and required us to get vaccines, and it was horrible. She was older and she's okay, but it was very emotionally draining and exhausting, and was not what I would have preferred as a parent, and I didn't have that right. And that's not okay. And our doctor that we loved and trusted turned into a robot. He would not respond to any questions. He would not share his opinion. He just read a script after that point. And that's what's happening in California right now. And it's unfortunate. And, a lot of people, being in the field myself, will, everybody asks, oh, what do you think is causing the rise of autism? And I share my opinion, and people will say, oh, it's not vaccine related. That's just like a sham. And I can tell you, as a professional, I've seen many clients that have a similar story to yours. And not everybody, but it does exist.
I agree.
Is important to be aware of.
Yes. Yep. I know for a fact that autism can occur without vaccines, right? Because we have so many environmental factors. So if we have a genetically vulnerable person, it's possible. And I know a few people who do have children with autism that have never received a vaccine, but it's very rare. And they're usually not as profoundly affected as the children.
Right.
And they usually don't have a history of that severe regression. You know what I mean? So it's definitely possible, but if we know something that is contributing significantly, and so moving forward, it's like, even getting, like you in California, for people who are not given the choice. Here in Michigan, we have every single exemption available to us, which is amazing. And I didn't even know that living here. I thought I had to give my daughter those vaccines that day. And so, but even just knowing things like the importance of vitamin A when you're getting an MMR shot, or even with just measles, like people who are deficient in vitamin A have far worse outcomes, whether you get the infection or you get the vaccine. So there's so many things that we could be mindful of. and that we could support people better that did want to move forward with that or that had to. But instead, I feel like we're just recklessly giving everyone, all of them, the same, treating everyone the same. And we're not taking into consideration saying like, let's check your vitamin A status, or let's check to see, you know, where your body needs more support while we move forward with this intervention. Because I think if they even mentioned that, it would just cause hesitancy. So they don't want to cause any hesitancy. So instead they just, you know, they just act like there's no precautions that need to be taken, and people are being harmed because of it. So it's like, we need to find a way to do this safely when we do it.
Yeah.
So
100%. I think that's such a good point. And, you know, it's something that we need to keep having these conversations and keep sharing. And I will definitely be sharing that book that you mentioned too in our show notes, and want to make sure that you have a chance to share how people can find you, and also kind of what's next for you in your professional endeavors.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. Currently it is at my.holistic.haven. I actually started that handle, gosh, it was like over a year ago now. I just wanted to start sharing about my health journey, and I just felt so passionate about sharing healing. You know, just so many people are out there suffering that all the things that I've learned, I'm like, how can I keep quiet about this? And I knew I wanted to eventually get into working in the functional space. And so I just started sharing about my own healing, or just, you know, just some general things about healing in general. And then I was like, well, I want to share about autism too. And so I shared a post about autism, and I got attacked so bad that I was like, I'm never talking about autism again on the internet. I didn't have thick skin. And I just completely was like mortified, and I lost sleep over it. And then I kind of came full circle, and I was like, okay, these kids need help, and I can't stay quiet. Like what, you know what I mean? I just need to focus on like the people out there who are like I was, desperate and searching for answers, and they're not getting any answers from their doctors. You know, autism doesn't tell you anything about what's going wrong below the surface. And so I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna share what I know, and I'm gonna share research. And if people disagree, that's fine, they can disagree. But my goal is really to like grab everybody. Like I want my arms to reach out to those people who don't believe, like, you know, that there's any value in looking at holistic medicine, or that are so autism is genetic, they can't see past that. Like I really want to speak to those people too, because those people like need it the most. So I try to present things in a way where I'm hopefully like talking to everybody. But I might end up changing my name at some point, just because it's really doesn't have anything to do with autism. But for now, that's what it is. And then for me professionally, like I said, I'm going through the MAPS training right now. I've done their online training. I'm not sure when I'm going to do their fellowship, because I'm not currently working right now, but I am just transitioning into working virtually with people when that fits into my schedule. Because first and foremost, right now, I'm just a mom, and I'm still advocating really hard for my kids. And so that's first. And my youngest is 3. So he's still pretty young. So I anticipate when he's a little bit older, I'll have a lot more time. But for right now, just taking it step by step.
Yep. I love it. It's so great. Well, you're doing amazing things just by sharing, you know, and supporting the families that you serve, and supporting your own family. You know, what a gift.
Yeah, thank you. And I admire you so much. The first time we talked, when I asked you, like, what is your relationship? Like, what got you into this with autism and advocating for these children? And most of us have a personal story like me. Like I kind of told you about my personal journey from like not knowing what autism was and being so judgmental to being completely humbled. And now, you know, I had no choice. Autism was like, it was my life. Whereas you autism didn't impact you personally. And here you are, you know, devoting your time to helping these families. And so I just admire you for that.
Thank you. That's so sweet. I know I met my first client with autism in college and just fell in love. And I just knew that this was it for me. And it's been an amazing journey. and I'm not done. I still have so much to learn and will forever be on a learning journey, but I absolutely love it.
All of us should always be. We're always have to be open to learning.
Yes. So fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for being here. This was wonderful, so informative. And I just recommend everybody to check out your website or your Instagram page and learn more, because I know you're going to keep sharing and keep helping others.
And I don't know, did I mention just a couple helpful resources for people?
Sure.
I don't know if I mentioned this or not. TACA, TACA, is a great place to start if you're not working with somebody. There's so many actionable steps that can kind of hold your hand and walk you through. Documenting Hope is a really great website as well. So I would check those out if you're listening and you want to start doing something proactive now.
Absolutely. I will make sure to include those both in the show notes. Awesome. And I know they have, TACA, at least I'm very familiar with, has huge conferences. We've actually spoken at them before about RDI, and they are a wealth of information. So I will make sure to include both of their websites on our show notes and all of your information, and any other resources you think of as well after today, please feel free to share and I'll include that.
All right.
Sounds good. Okay. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back, babe. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I find. I break the molds with the rebel's mind. I'm a hurricane of
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests, and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.